I'd like to welcome the members of our third panel today, which will focus on mutual responsibility, ערבות הדדית. How do Jewish communities cope with lockdown, social distancing, and an economic crisis? And the members of our panel are uniquely qualified to weigh in on this. Joining me are Rabbi Laura Janner-Klausner, the Senior Rabbi of Reform Judaism in the United Kingdom, Shira Ruderman, Executive Director of the Ruderman Family Foundation, and Erin Schrodi, activist and social entrepreneur, and Eric Fingerhut, President and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. Thank you all for joining us from far and wide. Rabbi Laura, I know that you have spent the last 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic giving spiritual guidance both to members of your own community in London and to rabbis of the Reform movement, the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. What have you learned about Jewish communities in this time?
Jews love being together. We love being together, and we love ritual together. So a lot of us have found it extremely hard not being together to mourn at Chagim, particularly at Pesach. And I think people have been very well behaved on the whole, but have found it very frustrating. And also we've had in Britain a disproportionate amount of Jews who've died. But if things are explained clearly why we can't be together, the community is completely compliant. But I've learned that Jews really love being together and now are hustling in a good way to get back into our Bate Knesset, into our synagogues, and we may not be able to do it for a long while.
And when you mentioned the fact that a disproportionate number of Jews have died in the UK, and we know it's probably the case in the United States as well. How has that impacted your work as a rabbi? Not just the fact that you have to deal with, help families through their mourning, through their shiva, in many cases, help organize funerals, but also there are spiritual questions, and there's a different kind of challenge than it usually is what rabbis have with dealing with death and mourning. How has it been different?
There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anger, which of course are two sides of the same coin, fear and anger, or anger and anxiety. So a lot of angst. So we're spending a lot of time processing anger.
Thank you, Laura. Erin, let's turn to you here. You've been active on a number of social issues, both within Jewish communities and with Israeli communities as well, and in much wider contexts of environmental campaigning. And we've seen that this pandemic has impacted especially on minority groups and small communities, and that the government at different levels hasn't always been fast enough in providing solutions. Do you see communities working together better in going forward in confronting this pandemic?
I can only hope that all of us rise to the occasion, that all of us answer this call to service, to tikkun olam, repair of the world. And at this moment in the face of COVID, perhaps it's all the more important to realize that tikkun olam doesn't need to be something that you do or perform or get involved in on the other side of the globe, that it starts at home, that it starts locally, that it starts in all of our communities where there are vulnerable populations. And that's something that I was raised with, those values of tikkun olam, but also the idea of grassroots local community organizing. And it's something that I'm really proud of our organization with Conscious Kitchen, with the feeding program here in Marin County. I'm talking to you from the Bay Area, where when we see so much access and so much privilege and a concentration of resources, there are also people struggling day in and day out. And if all of us took care of our communities and seized this mutual responsibility, we'd have stronger communities and stronger people and stronger world.
But we saw, especially here in Israel and other places around the world, at the beginning of the pandemic, a feeling of tension between communities, especially when there was this concern early on in the pandemic that there would be a lack of ICU beds and respirators and various other, and PPE and various all the things which are necessary to deal with the pandemic. And there were points where you felt that here in Israel, for example, that the ultra-Orthodox community and the mainstream Israeli community and perhaps the Israeli Arab community wouldn't really get along very well. It took, in some cases, a bit of time for us to work better together. How have you seen that in your more local communities?
while we are all being affected around the globe by COVID, we are not all in the same boat. We are all not being affected in the same ways. And I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge in times like this and always. But in moments like this, perhaps it's more important that we've already done the work, that we've built the bridges, that we built the trust, that we know each other, that we know who to call, how to show up. Because it's really hard to walk into a community blind and say, hey, I'm here to help. Help who? Why now? And particularly at a time when that is endangering other populations, but to recognize that we are not all born in the same boat, and that right here in Marin County, there are pockets of extraordinary need. Right there in Israel, there are pockets of extraordinary need. And those are the communities that perhaps need the prioritization of movements, not only right now, but thinking structurally. When we think about reform, when we think about the type of world and society we need to not only focus on relief and recovery, but resiliency and the sorts of things that we can plan for in the present, so that, God forbid, in the face of hopefully not the next pandemic, but a trying social moment, everyone can be a little bit better off. And we also know how to build stronger coalitions so that people don't suffer so greatly.
Shira, Erin mentioned both resources and priorities, and we know we're all very aware that this crisis has impacted on funding for communal organizations, for Jewish communal organizations. And as a leader of an important family foundation, how do you see the priorities for Jewish philanthropy going forward?
I would say that I think we have a lot in common, and as others said, many differences among. I think Jewish philanthropy stepped up in a tremendous way, locally, nationally, and when it comes to other communities outside of the Jewish world. In the same time, we have to try to grasp the needs before we even reacting. So they are, I would split it to short-term immediate, to long-term, which will impact each other. I would also say sustainability versus support and leadership. There are different pockets that may be connected in many moments, but they're not all one, because immediately we have to respond to the emergency needs. And I think Jewish philanthropy stepped up right away across the United States. In Israel, philanthropists stood up to tell the nonprofit, we are here, we're not going, we are fully backing up our commitment. But we also need time to assess what is the long-term need. There are so many needs, and Jewish philanthropy is part of every need, but we're not the solution to everything. So we have to, plan together with the different sectors. Maybe it would lead to better cooperations, so we can be better effective in, the results that we want to see. Maybe we can be also a little bit more cautious of how we spend and what we spend together and not together in terms of how we prioritize. I would in general say that I think that we seek to philanthropy at this time to first and most show support to back up the organizations. But we also, the way we see it at the Ruderman Family Foundation, we also want to make sure that, as Erin said before, that all populations are included and everyone step in. So we need to encourage people and, make them understand that there is no one need, one situation, one time to show support, leadership, and care. In the same time, we do have to take into consideration that, the market is impacted. As a result of it, philanthropy will be impacted. So not everything will be able to stay in the same shape and form for the long term. And I hopefully, I'm seeking and hoping and really trying to encourage our partners to step in together, to share resources, to share best practices, to make sure that, in one hand, we give sustainability, in the other hand, we show inspiration and leadership to others to come forward.
Thank you, Shira. Eric, you're joining us from Washington, and you're at the intersection of both the largest network of Jewish communities, I think, ever in history. Correct me, I think 450 federations and independent communities across North America, and at the same time, a government, both at federal and state and local levels, struggling to deal with this crisis. And as Shiraz said, there's this need to create sustainability across these networks where you have lots of different pockets with various levels of resources. How do you manage such a situation from where you're sitting?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think I agree with Shira. I think philanthropy has done an amazing job, but I think we would also all agree that the level of the magnitude of this crisis is far beyond what philanthropy on its own can manage. This is absolutely a case where it's going to take many different pieces of putting the puzzle together to sustain our community, and government plays an important role. So you started your question to me by noting that I am in Washington, D.C. It's where I live. I also happen to have a background. I was a member of Congress back in the 90s and been very active in government for a number of years. So I can tell you that the role that the Jewish Federations of North America played in working with the federal government and all the other large nonprofit organizations in the United States was really historic. We've had
So we've had a bit of a problem here with the line. Eric, if you could talk a bit more about the role of government in dealing with this pandemic.
So what I was saying was that as generous as philanthropy has been, and really it's been extraordinary, the magnitude of this crisis, we've never before seen a situation where every single community, every single Jewish agency, synagogue, has been impacted equally, as has, frankly, the rest of the nonprofit community. And I think it's important to understand that in the United States, the structure of our civil society is such that the nonprofit community plays a huge role in delivering the basic services to those in need. As Aaron was speaking before, we don't have the same comprehensive social system run by government. It's done in partnership with the nonprofit community. So we joined together, the Jewish Federations of North America joined together with the other large nonprofits in the United States, United Way and Catholic Charities and Lutheran Ministries and Habitat for Humanity and those kinds of Boys and Girls Clubs, those kinds of organizations. And we advocated to our federal government that the nonprofit community should be included as an essential part of the economic package that was put together by government. And indeed it was in a historic way. And then our community mobilized together to help walk our agencies through the process of accessing these resources. Because of course, a small shelter or a food bank in a community doesn't necessarily know how to apply for a small business association loan and get a bank and all of those things. And so we had a vast network of communications and volunteers who were helping. And the result was a very significant fusion of short-term, it's not long-term, but short-term resources, probably $500 million just into the Jewish communal sector alone. And I think that helps with what Shira was saying, which is while philanthropy needs to take a longer term look. If you expended all of your resources in the short term, you wouldn't be able to help the recovery that's coming. We were able to mobilize the community. At the same time, I do want to say that you've seen all of the networks come together. We have weekly meetings with all of the networks representing all of the day schools and all of the Hillels on campus and all of the Jewish community centers and all of the camps and all of the synagogue movements. It's really been an extraordinary coming together to share information, to help each other through this challenge.
Thank you, Eric. Since we're almost wrapping up our conference here, and when we were planning, together with our partners, including from the Ruderman Family Foundation, this conference, and when we were told that it would come out just before Shavuot, it was clear that we would be trying to find a way to address both the special Tikkun Shavuot, which is, as we all know, the nightly study of Torah, when we try to correct the fact that our forefathers at Mount Sinai were late in waking up from Matan Torah, and with a much wider idea of the correction that we need today in the world, with the Tikkun Olam that is so much part of our of our ethos. And I'd like for each of you, very briefly, because we're running out of time, if you could just for a minute try give us an idea that you have for how the Tikkun Shavuot of the Torah comes together with the broader ideas of Tikkun Olam. Laura, how about you?
So I'm thinking of Shavuot as a step towards the Promised Land, and the title of this is Mutual Responsibility, and it's for Haaretz. So we have 4 people from the Tfutzot, from the diaspora speaking, but I think that Shavuot is about also that mutual responsibility between the diaspora and what's happening in Israel. So I think one of the expressions of Shavuot and of Matan Torah for me was the trembling and the fear and the expectation. So it can't be separate. What's happening to us in the Tfutzot is connected to what's happening in the diaspora, is connected to what's happening in Israel. And if there's a time to mark that, it's Shavuot, where we say, right, these are the rules, this is the step forward. We have to go together towards the land of Israel, and it has to also behave in that kind of way that we need it to.
Thank you, Laura. And personally, I hope I see you very soon in our joint neighborhood coffee shop in Jerusalem. And the next time we do a Haaretz conference, we won't be stuck here in a Tel Aviv studio, but back in a big conference hall in Jerusalem. Shira was with us there last year. And what are you taking from this Shavuot and to the wider Tikkun Olam, Shira?
I would say 2 main things. First, I connect my thought to what Laura said. I think that one of their main causes or the main goals that we have together is to define what is the common destiny or common vision that we have as Jewish people today around the world, as in relationship to Israel and to each other. I think that we don't have this common vision as we used to have it in the past, and maybe this will be an opportunity to allow us, through new platforms, through diverse conversations, to define what is our common goal together. The second thing I would say, which is more on the personal level, that I really hope that this Shavuot people will, process humility. I think that this situation that we're all going through, even if it's in different ways, made us realize that the small things, the daily things counted and important. And how we as people, as society, as a Jewish community, if it's here in the United States or in other places around the world, bring these shared values of humility together so we can cooperate better. We can allow ourselves to, listen to each other in days of not crisis, that we can, agree on things that we don't agree, but still respect and include each other. And I really hope that we will take and cherish this moment, because my biggest fear that, once COVID is over, and in some places it's not over, but the gates are open, the borders are open, there is a feeling that we're going back to the same routine, that whatever we went through has to stay with us, not just financially as a crisis, on a value principle, on a mindset, on a behavioral to each other. And this is my biggest prayer this Shavuot.
Thank you, Shira. Eric, in Washington, is there going to be much Tikkun Olam this Tikkun Shavuot, or are things going to go, or as Shira fears, are things going to go back to normal once the pandemic has calmed down a bit?
Well, certainly there is a fear already that you're starting to see the partisanship come back. This first aid package that we saw was unanimous. And the second one, maybe, 1 or 2 votes. And now you're starting to see it. And of course, this is an election year in the United States, not just you've finally resolved all the election crises in Israel, and we're about to head into.
I'm not sure we've resolved it yet.
But I do want to say that I think there's been, my lesson for Shavuot. I always love the old Jewish joke, if you will, when you can't you met somebody you can't remember where, you say, well, we met at Sinai, right? And that that comes from this old rabbinic tale that it wasn't just the Israelites that left Egypt that all gathered at the foot of Sinai to Matan to receive the Torah, but every Jew who ever lived or ever will live had a place at the foot of Mount Sinai. And the extraordinary nature of this pandemic is that we really were, even for a moment, all in it together. There was a moment when Israel was locked down and the Jewish community all around the world was locked down, and we were all experiencing this together. And even though it was an experience of pain and of loss, I hope that we will take that sense of being all in it together and carry it forward into Shavuot and beyond. I don't know if we'll be able to extend that to the political dynamics in our countries, but maybe we can do, as Shira has indicated, extend it to our Jewish family.
Thanks, Eric. Erin, how are you going to extend Tikkun Shavuot to your Tikkun Olam this year?
Well, every year for the past number of years, I've been in Israel on Shavuot. And for me, it's for all of us. It's also this harvest holiday and the humility and the gratitude that we see there. So I'll take it from a slightly different angle, which is looking at it as gratitude for what the land has brought us, for what we have, for gathering together. And as someone who's focused so much on the feeding side of things and the environmental side of things, and looking at these changing of the seasons and thinking about what this means. What does spring or summer mean in a COVID context? And also thinking about the gratitude. I wish I were in Israel. I wish I were on the Moshav to see the fruits of the land, but thinking about all of us and the sorts of systems that we can put in place to cultivate healthy societies, but also healthy land. And I think there's a lot for us to think about. Maybe we're not gathered around the same tables, but this is a time of harvest. This is a time of seeing the fruits of our labor, maybe in a different way, but it's also looking at that coming down with the law, with all that we're receiving, and making sense of that in our heads so that it doesn't just work for today, but it works for many generations to come who will see the seed sown of what they do and what our children's do. So hopefully we can all live in healthy, more just communities and world.
Thank you for mentioning the land, Haaretz. And thank you all for being part of this. Here from the Haaretz newsroom. Really, it was great having you all from so far away talk about Shavuot and Tikkun Olam, and Chag Sameach to everyone. And thank you for your patience with all the technical issues that we've had here on this panel. And Lashana Haba, we usually say it in Pesach, but we can say Shavuot this year as well. Lashana Haba, B'Yerushalayim Habnuya. In the next Haaretz conference, hopefully we can all be there physically as well. Chag Sameach.
Amen. Chag Sameach.